All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a presentation on raising hogs organically. My name is Jillian Lowry, and I'm the Farm and Garden Consultant for New Country Organics. Today, I want to preface the presentation by saying first, this is my first presentation via webinar. So certainly if you have questions on the PowerPoint as I go on, feel free to refer to the comment section and leave a comment, and I'll be checking back and answering questions throughout my presentation. Secondly, I also want to preface that I am not an expert on organic standards for hogs. So if you are a certified organic hog operation, please always check with your certifier. I will be saying that repeatedly through my presentation just so that I don't misinform you if you are organically certified. Predominantly, this presentation will be for those that are following organic standards but aren't necessarily certified. So to begin, there are a variety of methods to consider before choosing your production plan. First, consider your capital, labor and management, and land. How much would you like to invest in your herd? How much time and labor do you have to devote to raising these hogs? And also, how much land do you have to afford appropriate spacing for each animal? There's three main types of operations currently practiced in the US today. There's the farrow to finish operation, farrow to feeder, and feeder to finish. And we'll go into those in more depth in later slides. Ultimately, though, I want to stress that there is no one perfect system. Find what works best for your herd and for your farm and your family in this production. Farrow to finish is one of the more lengthy operations. The time frame takes approximately 10 to 11 months. 4 months of that time frame is devoted to breeding and gestation, while 6 to 7 months are needed for raising the piglets to market. The market weight is approximately 240 pounds. So with that, you need to consider feed and cost of land as well to maintain each animal and maintain the size of your farm. For the sows, breeding and farrowing are the biggest maintenance needs and maintaining their nutrition as well. There's a variety of different management operations with sows as far as a two litter system or multi-litter system throughout the year. The most common one for backyard farms is a 2-litter farrowing system where you have your hogs farrow both in spring and in fall. That allows time for the piglets from each litter to grow to market weight by the next farrowing system. Additionally, with the sows portion of it, you should consider which type of production materials you'd like to use. By that, I mean farrowing crates versus farrowing huts, and also your fencing and other materials. We'll go into more depth in a little bit about the differencing between farrowing crates and farrowing huts, but ultimately in organic operation, farrowing crates, to the best of my knowledge, are not allowed because it limits the sows' freedom to move around. However, for those that are not following or that are not organically certified, it may be better to use farrowing crates on a smaller system because they're only going to be in those crates for about 21 days. As long as you are maintaining good observation of your sow's health and making sure there's no abrasions or any kind of bacterial infections or anything like that from being in such a small area, then the sow is generally pretty content as long as she's able to still lie down. The purpose of the crate is more just to prevent crushing of the pigs underneath the sow. However, with farrowing huts, as you will see in a later slide, farrowing huts allow for greater space, so crushing is also not as big of an issue. It allows for a lot more space for the piglets to run away in case the sow doesn't see them. She's also going to be more adept to hearing the animals in that environment as opposed to a multitude of sows in one room. With every pig squealing, it's going to be really hard for her to distinguish which one is she stepping on. She may not notice it, and that's where you can lead to greater pig mortality. Additionally, with the farrow to finish operation, you should consider replacement gilts throughout your operation. With each farrow, you should consider the evaluation of each animal, looking for proper body size and body style, looking at the sow's reproductive history and her consistent litters or consecutive litters. You should evaluate teat placement as well as teat shape and function. For replacement gilts, it's important to look at the sow's history and also her sow's history to determine strong production records. This system requires a higher capital and labor input and is a much long-term commitment than other systems, since you have so many other factors pertaining to this. This is an example of current farrowing crates used in confinement operations. I have seen this system work at Virginia Tech swine barns. They do use farrowing crates. Generally, there's only about 13 sows per room, if I'm correct, and they're very high managed in that each sow is evaluated every day, twice a day when they do their feedings. The sows are given full feed so they can eat as much as they want and meet their nutritional needs. They also have a fresh water system as well, and the piglets are very carefully monitored also. These systems can be considered cruel in some operations that are not as well managed, where they can cause abrasions of the skin, which later lead to infection. So with this, again, if you are certified organic, I do not believe that farrowing crates are allowed for organic operations. They have to have constant access to outdoors and freedom to range outdoors as well as around inside too. This is an example of farrowing huts. As you can see, there's a variety of different methods used. There's the teepee style, there's the dome-shaped style, and then just your general run-in shelter. Any of these are fine as long as you provide sufficient space for the sow to turn around, move around, have enough bedding in there as well for her to nest, and allow sufficient area for the piglets to escape if she's lying down. It's generally recommended, as you can see in the upper right corner of the PowerPoint presentation, to place the feed within the middle of your sow's huts. It's generally recommended to also have more huts than sows in a field. Generally, you're only going to have about a stocking ratio or stocking density of 8 sows per acre. So if you had 8 sows farrowing on 1 acre of land, you would want to have at least 10 huts. Welcome, Kaylee. We're discussing farrowing systems right now and different farrowing huts versus farrowing crates. I can go back real quickly. This is an example of the farrowing crates that are used in confinement operations. And if you are certified organic, this is not allowed for organic production to the best of my knowledge. So farrowing huts would be your next option, which are these featured here. The beginning part of my presentation can be accessed after this presentation is over. There will be a recording on our website as well as on YouTube under our YouTube channel. And certainly if you have questions pop up, please feel free to ask in the comment section. I'd be happy to answer them throughout my presentation. The farrow to feeder operation is another fairly commonly practiced operation. This is a shorter time frame and a little bit less management than the farrow to finish operation. Essentially, you're mainly maintaining your sows. You're breeding and farrowing, you're following their nutrition management, but you're not keeping the piglets for an extended period of time. You're not having to raise them to market weight. So your feed costs are going to be much less expensive. However, keep in mind that with the farrow to feeder operations, it generally allows for you to have more farrowings per year. I believe, if I'm correct, that you don't want to have a sow farrow more than twice a year. The farrowing ratio is, or the farrowing time frame is 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, which is 114 days. So you want to allow for about 4 months for that breeding and gestation period. Also, the time frame after that will be 1 to 2 months until pigs will reach about 30 to 60 pounds. This is when you will then market them to other finishing operations or local farms that want to practice feeder to finish, which we'll cover next. This method decreases the need for facilities. You don't need as much space because essentially the pigs will be ready to go after weaning phase. It can last up to about a month to 2 months after that point, but generally they gain pretty quickly in that first month post-weaning. This will also lower your overall capital and labor, again, as you won't be managing so many different phases of growth. Some find it to be a risky feeder pig market in that it's not always easy to find somebody to buy the feeder pigs, and you could end up with a surplus of pigs. So that's where you'll have to tailor it to your own production needs and to your farm needs and find what works best for you. It may take a couple of tries to establish what works best, but each one will vary from farm to farm. Feeder to finish is by far one of the most common practices, especially for your backyard farmers. The time frame is only about 4 to 5 months, since you're only raising the pigs from about 30 to 60 pounds up to market weight of 240 pounds. Your greatest expense is going to be the nutritional side of it. There will be minimum capital and labor, meaning that you won't have to invest in those farrowing crates. You won't have as much need for your sow houses or anything like that. You'll just need open pasture if you're following organic standards and run-in shelters for inclement weather. There's no long-term commitment, so you could stop at any time. You can certainly raise your pigs to whatever slaughter weight you prefer, and it does vary by breed, which we'll get to as well. Additionally, you should consider the source, health, and quality of the pigs that you're buying. That's one thing that can lead to biosecurity issues if your contact Okay, I'm not sure what happened there, that I somehow locked myself out of that. But we were discussing feeder to finish operations, and hopefully my PowerPoint can still be seen as well. I'm using a double computer screen here, so it's a little difficult. Anyway, with feeder to finish operations, there's minimal capital and labor. There's no long-term commitment, but the only thing you have to consider is the source of where you're getting your pigs. So make sure that you have evaluated those farms for good production practices, for sanitary production practices, and make sure that they've done sufficient testing as well for various pig diseases and problems. This is an example of a commercial feeder to finish operation. So it's very common for your larger markets, but obviously is not allowed for organics. You can see that the pigs are pretty crowded in there, although I have seen this work effectively for major producers. But I don't fully agree with their production standards, just given that the pigs don't have access to outdoors. All they see are the slatted floors and the indoor operation. They're not allowed fresh access outside to pasture or anything like that. They are allowed full feed. They are allowed fresh water, but it can certainly get out of hand trying to maintain that many animals in such a small space. In contrast, this is an outdoor feeder to finish operation. You can see that the pigs have free range to forage and fields, or in some areas that may have lesser pasture availability, they may just have a movable dome, such as the one in the upper right-hand corner, where they just move that building around their farm as needed. As you maintain these areas, it's important to watch for soil erosion, and also, since pigs have no sweat glands, they tend to wallow in dirt and mud to cool themselves down. So it's important to watch for those wet areas to make sure that they're free of parasites and disease. If you start to see it get really nasty, that's time to move your pigs out of that field, because it can lead to a lot of health problems. You want to make sure that if you are pasture raising these animals, that they're kept in a very lush field, and we'll get into the nutritional side of that in a few slides. For general piglet care, it's important, again, to check with your certifier if you're organic certified. There are a variety of different commonly practiced items here that I've listed that are not necessarily approved for organics. So for right now, I've just listed the basics, and then since I'm not certified organic with hogs, I don't want to speak out of turn. So if you're at all confused on what is allowed for your farm, just check with your certifier. They'll have all of that and be able to educate on that. But the main commonly practiced items here is day one, disinfect the navel with iodine tincture. It's usually about 10%. Then you also want to make sure that each pig gets enough colostrum. That's where you need to evaluate your sow as well as the piglets and make sure that each piglet is able to nurse appropriately. When a piglet goes to nurse on a sow, it's really unique in that they latch on to one teat, and that is forever their teat. They will not go to another one. They will automatically always go to that spot. So it's very important for the piglet to bond with the sow, because if they miss this important window, they will not nurse. And that's where tube feeding may be necessary to make sure that they're getting the nutrients they need in that critical window of about 24 to 48 hours. By day 3, it's generally recommended to give them an iron supplement of some sort. A lot of commercial operations will use an iron injection, but that is not considered an organic practice. It is not approved with USDA organic standards. So there is one product called Pig Perk. I'm not very familiar with it, but it's essentially a free choice item that you can leave with them that they will ingest orally, and that helps meet their organic or their iron needs as well. You can also, if you're pasture raising them, having access to quality soil will help get that iron in their body as well. Again, if you're at all confused with what's allowed for organic standards, check with your certifier, because they'll be able to give you some recommendations for what you can use. Some other common practices used is to clip the needle teeth. Generally, these teeth are extremely sharp, and having personally been bitten by a piglet when it was trying to search for the teat, it can be very painful. So thinking of what that might cause pain to the sow, trying to keep her animal welfare rights in state and trying to make sure that she's well maintained. A lot of breeders choose to clip those needle teeth so it's more comfortable for her. However, again, production standards are changing with organic standards, so it's important to check with your certifier on whether or not this is allowed. A lot of people have a misconception that you have to clip the needle teeth all the way to the gum line. And actually that's found to be less beneficial for the piglet, as it can lead to infection of the gums and then lead to potential death if they gain an infection at too young of an age. Tail docking is another common practice that helps to eliminate biting of each other in a small enclosure. However, the argument is for organic standards, if they are allowed free range on a farm, they're not going to be as prone to biting because they're not bored. They're not confined in a small area. So they're not going to be as prone to chew on each other out of boredom. However, a lot of breeders do still practice tail docking just as a cleanliness factor, and that's usually done at day 3 with the iron supplement. If it's done before the iron supplement is given or the body's had time to gain the iron from the environment, then it could cause bleed out and potential death in the piglets. So that's another reason why a lot of producers will choose not to tail dock. So with all of that, it's important for you to find what works best for your farm. And it may take a couple of tries to decide which is the better method. Ear notching is the other most commonly practiced form of identification. There's a good scorecard that you can find online, or some images that detail where the notchings are. They indicate numbers. So on the right-hand side, I believe that is the piglet identification number, and then on the left-hand side, it's the litter number. So for that, you would have, your sow would have a specific litter number identification, and that would be for all of her piglets. They would all be the same in the left ear. On the right-hand side, it would be number 1 or number 3. And there's different notches in the ear that indicate which that is. So when you're looking out over your field, it's a lot faster to identify a pig as opposed to trying to track them down and look at a tattoo in their ear and try to keep them still while you read it. So as of right now, to the best of my knowledge, ear notching is approved for organic use, but I did read an article that said that this is up for consideration again and potentially will change in the future. So again, if you are certified organic, just make sure that you check with your certifier on whether or not that's allowed. And to have him make sure that he's keeping you apprised of any changes that are coming in the future. Day 7 up to about day 14 is when you would perform castrations and vaccinations. Castration is another method that is generally practiced to prevent boar taint in the meat. So especially if you're raising them for meat, then you don't want the testosterone to leave a negative taste in the meat. Vaccinations are something else that's also a little tricky with organic certification. To the best of my knowledge, most vaccinations are allowed because it's keeping in mind the animal's welfare. It's preventing them from disease as opposed to antibiotic use, which may be unnecessary. With vaccinations, these are the most commonly used. Circovirus prevents wasting disease, which is also termed post-weaning multisystemic wasting syndrome. This most commonly affects piglets, but can also affect older animals. Mycoplasma protects against infectious pneumonia. PRRS is porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome, which is also known as blue ear pig disease. It affects the ability of the body to breathe and also reproduce. Erysipelas is an infectious disease caused by a bacterium that causes sudden death, fever, skin lesions, abortions, and arthritis. Influenza is an acute, highly contagious respiratory disease. Leptospirosis is a reproductive disease that can also cause major non-reproductive illness in humans. So it's very important. That one is one of the most widely vaccinations out there, specifically because it is a zoonotic problem. Parvovirus also is an infectious infertility disease that essentially causes death of the fetus and uterus tissue and can lead to death of the sow as well. Currently, if you're familiar with PEDV, it was the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus that hit the States. It is in Virginia, and thankfully I worked at Virginia Tech in the swine barns as a volunteer and was able to see how they handled all of that practice with biosecurity. And it was really neat to see the production standards put in place to protect their herd and protect their farm, and it did not cross into their herd. With PEDV, Virginia Tech is the lead researcher in a vaccine to prevent that. One of their postdoctoral students has come up with something that is now under test, so hopefully we'll see that hit the market soon as well. Again, I'm not sure which of these are approved for organics, so it's always recommended to check with your certifier to make sure that you're still within your organic standards. Moving on to pasture farrowing. This is another common practice for backyard farmers. Again, as we talked about, it allows for more space for the sow and her piglets. It prevents potential crushing of the piglets as they have more ability to move around. One pasture is used for about 4 weeks until post-weaning period, at which point the sows are separated from the piglets and moved to a different pasture. Each pasture should be given about a 3 weeks rest period to prevent parasite buildup. The farrowing huts that we looked at before provide a dry, weather-protected environment that they can bed down in and truly create a normal nest that would be more inclined to what they do in the wild. The larger the area, the safer the piglets. And it's generally recommended that you set it at least 50 feet apart so that the sows aren't encroaching on each other's territory. If you recall from earlier on the presentation, and again, this will be recorded so you can see it afterwards on our YouTube channel, but earlier in the presentation, one of the areas showed the farrowing huts set around the feeding stations. And so that allowed the sows to kind of congregate in the middle, but then still go their separate ways to their separate pens. It's important to have more farrowing huts than the number of sows. So since the stocking density is generally 8 to 10 sows per acre, it's important to have a few more huts than that so they have a choice about which hut they want to go to. All of this promotes health and boosts natural immunity as they're able to forage as needed and find the minerals and vitamins through the soil and the forage itself. Pasture finishing is generally hogs raised on grass, legumes, standing crops, or any other ground cover. Grain crops are helpful for forage, and corn is considered the best pasture as it is high in starch and promotes fast growth. Legumes are items like alfalfa, peas, red Ladino, Cura, and Alsite clovers. All of these are generally high in crude protein. Chicory, rape, and other grasses are also used, but aren't necessarily as palatable to sows and piglets. Electric polywire works well for hogs. Generally, you have 2 lines that you use. One is a few inches off the ground. The other is about 2 feet off the ground. That allows for the piglets to not be able to slip under, but it's enough of a deterrent that they won't go near it. So it's very easy to set up and move around and transition to different fields. A lot of people will also use electric net fencing, which has also been very effective, but that generally tends to be a lot more than what you need. But certainly if you have pasture rotations with other animals such as horses and cattle and goats and sheep and other livestock like that, you can certainly use the same materials for that fencing as long as you're able to keep them in that enclosure so they're not escaping. Because pigs are known for being fairly good escape artists otherwise. With the pasture rotations, it's important to put sows or put pigs near the end of that rotation. So initially you would have your goats and sheep, and followed by your cattle or horses, and then followed by chickens and or pigs. By putting the pigs and the chickens last, it acts as your natural tilling method. They're also going to get more protein from some of the insects that have laid eggs in the manure of the other animals. And the pigs are also really good at scavenging any other plants that are left behind. Again, it's helpful with this to make sure that you're watching for soil erosion issues. You don't want them to till too much. That's something also with organic operations, that the ring in the nose is not allowed in organic operations because it keeps them from doing what's their natural behavior. So utilizing their natural behavior can be beneficial, especially in areas that you may have cut down trees for areas that you wanted to use for other crop production. They can get in there and root up those stumps. They can get in there and turn that dirt for you. And then when you rotate them out, you can put down a cover crop, and it's generally very fertile soil. Some other benefits of pasture finishing include the feed costs that are cut in half or more. Allowing them to use one of your other cash crops, such as corn or grains, allows them to kind of finish the field after you've harvested. So they're allowed to go in there and eat to their heart's content. So that'll majorly cut down on your additional feed costs. Additionally, it also will reduce your overall capital costs and labor. So since they're free ranging, there's less work that you have to do. There's also less cleaning, essentially. If you're doing adequate pasture rotations, you don't have to go in there and clean out those buildings right and left. And there has been studies showing that having a pasture finished animal has boosted the weaning weights. This is an example of pasture raised pork. You can see that they're free ranging and happy. You can see in the bottom right hand side of the PowerPoint that there's just 2 strands of polywire used, and it's very effective at keeping that hog in there. They're not going to try to get under that. They're not the most agile compared to goats and sheep, so that's a better deterrent for them than it is for goats and sheep. Going a little bit further into nutrition, again, having quality and consistent pasture forage is important. Again, watch for soil erosion to make sure that they're not destroying your fields or leaving wallowing locations that are building up parasites or disease. For additional nutrition, again, for the piglets, you need an iron source, whether that be the pig perk that I mentioned, or allowing them the free range in the soil to get it naturally through the soil. Colostrum and milk is also important. If you have a sow that's potentially dies from complications of birth, it's important to have at least 1 or 2 other sows that have recently farrowed. It's important to group those farrowings so that you can practice placing the pigs on essentially a wet nurse is what we term it for goats, but you want to place it on a foster mother. And having them at a younger age, having them farrowing at a closer time, they're more likely to adopt that animal as opposed to reject it. So there's also other materials out there for milk replacement. You can certainly find other milk on the market too. But again, if you're certified organic, it's important to check with your certifier to see what's allowed to be used. Additionally, you can provide a starter pig feed, which is about 18% crude protein mix. That'll help with their accelerated growth in that first couple months. Post-wean, generally they're weaned at about 21 days to 30 days. After that point, for about 2 months, they should be fed a 16% crude protein mix. Generally, it's recommended to feed about 4 to 6 pounds per pig, but again, keep in mind if they're on forage, they may not need that much. So tailor it to what their nutritional needs are. The finishing phase is 4 to 6 pounds of a 12% crude protein mix until they reach that market weight of 240 pounds. The 12%, it will be a higher starch but lower protein feed that allows for a faster but more controlled growth. They're not going to gain too quickly and gain too much fat. It'll be a much better marbling in the meat if you keep them on a more controlled growth. Usually the average daily gain is about 1.5 pounds per day. For maintenance and gestation diets, generally it's recommended to feed 4 to 6 pounds of the 12% protein mix as well. Lactation is a little bit different in that each sow has a greater nutritional need depending on how many pigs that they've had. So if you have a sow that had a litter of 9 to 10 pigs or more, first of all, it's important to check that sow and make sure she has enough teats to maintain that. Otherwise, you may need to find a foster sow to raise some of them. You also want to make sure that her teats are functional teats, but then you also want to make sure that you provide enough nutrition for her to meet that demand that's coming from her body. You don't want her pulling from her own body reserves to feed those piglets. So especially if she's getting some forage and everything, it's recommended to still offer a 12 to 16% crude protein mix, free choice. So for example, when I did my sow project at Virginia Tech, our sow consumed about 17 pounds within the first 2 days when she was on full feed, and then dropped down to about 15 pounds per day and averaged that throughout the lactation. When it got towards the end of the weaning period, she was weaned off of that herself and was put on a more controlled feed mix of 4 to 6 pounds a day. So in choosing your hogs, there's a variety of ones out there. Tamworths are really good-natured. They thrive on pasture and love to forage. They're one of the most excellent pigs for that. So if you're considering a pasture-raised operation, Tamworths are probably your best bet. They have excellent gain without having excess fat, and their meat still tastes really good. So their appearance is generally red. They're a medium-sized hog, so they're not too big to handle. Hampshires are the black pig with a white band around their midsection there. They have strong feed efficiency, meaning their feed conversion ratio is really good. Generally, like I said, their average daily gain should be about 1.5 pounds per day, and they're one of those breeds that excels at that, even gaining more than that per day. They have a lean, flavorful meat. They're strong foragers also and have strong maternal instincts. So if you're considering a farrow to feeder or farrow to finish operation, Hampshires might be one of your best bets. Berkshires are a fast and efficient growth hog. They have strong reproductive efficiency in that they have very large and healthy litters. Their meat is quality lean meat, but it still has a good bit of marbling. So they still get a good enough fat in their meat without being overly fatty. So they still have a lot of that good juicy taste that you like in some of your pork chops. They're very hardy animals, generally have a little bit more parasite resistance than some of your other breeds. Yorkshires are fast-growing hogs. They're your standard pink pig. They have lean, flavorful meat and have very large litters. They're also very large themselves. So for a smaller operation, that might not be your best bet, as they can be a little bit more harder to maintain. They're very hardy animals and they have strong maternal instincts. So again, if you're considering a farrowing operation, they're another really good breed for that. This is my personal favorite hog. It's an American guinea hog and one that I have raised with my family. Granted, we only raised 2 hogs ourselves because we only have 3 acres, but they were really good-natured pigs. We got them as a feeder, so they were about 30 to 60 pounds, and they're extremely good-natured. They're a little wild at first, but they warm up to their owners, especially those that are feeding them. They're a smaller breed and easy to maintain, and they're good for both meat and lard production. So when we slaughter our pigs, they're kind of a little bit too fat, and we got 200 pounds of meat and 100 pounds of lard from 2 pigs. So it was kind of a bit overfed, but the meat was still really, really good. They're also really good foragers as well and excel on pasture. With these hogs, and mine are the ones featured on the right, it's also important to remember what you want to feed them. So with organic standards, you have to maintain that you're feeding them organic products. So if you are feeding vegetables and things like that, everything has to be tracked and recorded and approved through your certifier. So organic vegetables, things that do not have chemicals and things like that, that is the only thing that you can feed them, especially with the organic feeds too. For your commercial hog operations, according to my swine professor at Virginia Tech, it is actually illegal to feed over-the-counter feeds. So your slops, your leftovers from your fridge, older vegetables and things like that. According to laws and commercial standards, you have to cook those vegetables before you can give it to them. So again, that's where you'd have to check with your certifier and see what the organic legislation says. Personally, with our hogs, we gave them vegetable scraps, we gave them goat milk from our goats, we gave them leftover eggs from our chickens, and they were super, super healthy. And they did great. They are really good. They have really good feed efficiency, so their feed conversion ratio is really good, and they gain quickly. So again, if you're considering using your hogs as somebody to clean up your leftovers and also clean up your pastures and fields, this would be a good breed to use. So just to cover the basic organic legislation, these are just a broad overview. Essentially, all you need is to have an environment that allows the animals to express natural behaviors. So again, having access to the outdoors, having the ability to root, so that means not having the nose ring, offering preventative health care, and I took this to mean vaccines, so that's why I included the vaccination slide. Protection from conditions that jeopardize an animal's well-being, such as predators and adverse weather. So that means maintaining good fencing, so having an electrified fence line or something sturdy to keep them in and keep predators out. It's not to confine the animal, it's just to keep predators out from getting them and protect their well-being. And also having a shelter of some sort that's dry and allows them to get in from adverse weather conditions. Again, it's always best to check with your certifier. These go a little bit more in depth. So livestock healthcare practice standards is the establishment of appropriate housing, pasture conditions, and sanitation practices to minimize the occurrence and spread of diseases and parasites. Again, like I mentioned, with checking the wallowing conditions, making sure that those water areas aren't getting overly muddy and disgusting, because it can be the breeding ground for coccidia and worms and other issues. Also allowing areas that allow exercise, freedom of movement, and reduction of stress appropriate to the species. So making sure that in their pasture, they have the ability to run around, they have the ability to get away from other animals that may be bothering them, things like that, and reduce stress as much as possible. Additionally, with allowing that openness and that ability to go outside and exercise, you're going to have better meat. It's going to be, potentially a little bit tougher than those that are changed to a fence, essentially, like veal would be, but it's going to be really good quality meat if they're allowed to follow their natural instincts. Again, with livestock living conditions, the producer of an organic livestock operation must establish and maintain living conditions that accommodate the health and natural behavior of animals with the outdoors, shade, shelter, exercise areas, all of that. So again, I can't stress the environment enough. The shelter should allow for natural maintenance, comfort behaviors, and opportunity to exercise. It should be well ventilated and have plenty of air circulation. It's one thing with any animal, if they have any sort of inside enclosure with bedding, you want to make sure that ammonia levels aren't rising. Generally with hogs, they're not going to dirty their sleeping area too much. They tend to go in one section. So making sure you keep that section clean and dry is really important, again, to prevent disease and also protect from pneumonia and things like that. You also want to make sure that you're providing plenty of water access, that you're keeping the soil healthy, and that you're not going to affect whatever water supply is nearby. So runoff is huge in the swine industry. That's something that they have to really keep in mind on. A lot of operations have lagoon systems where all the pig waste goes to one area. Now, with Virginia Tech, one of the problems that they face is that the lagoon is in a location that they have to pump it because they have so much going on there that they have to have somebody come in and take that waste off. Otherwise, it could potentially overflow, and that would be a problem in the Blacksburg community. So they have to keep that in mind as how you affect the environment. What are your production standards, and how are they going to potentially negatively impact the environment? So always making sure that you have an ability to remove the manure properly and handle it and compost it properly is important. So with that, that's essentially all I had for today. It was just a brief overview of raising hogs organically. I had hoped that we'd have a bigger audience today that I could answer questions. Kaylee, certainly if you type in the comments below, you can certainly do so, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I hope that you learned a lot. If you have any questions, you can certainly email me at Jillian, Jillian, at newcountryorganics.com. You can certainly call our sales team as well. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding nutrition or management of your hog operation. Our number is 540-469-0694. Thanks so much.